Hello guys, today we're going to talk about how the Roman Empire gave birth to Christianity. So, kind of to set the stage, obviously before Christianity came along and before Judaism spread throughout the Roman Empire, the Romans were already practicing religion, but as you can see here, they had borrowed that religion primarily from the Greeks. So I'm just going to scroll through really fast, and I just want you to glance at some of the Greek names that you are really familiar with and how on the right their persona just got taken up and the Romans changed their name. So Zeus became Jupiter and Aphrodite became Venus. Cleopatra dressed up as Venus, by the way, goddess of love when she was going to meet Mark Antony. Hades becomes Pluto. Anyway, I'm not going to read them all, but you can see that Athena became Minerva. Ares, the god of war, becomes Mars. Hermes, the little messenger god, becomes Mercury. Hypnos becomes Somnus. Uranus stays the same. Nike becomes Victoria, or Victory. And Odysseus becomes Ulysses. This is why sometimes you see Hercules called Heracles as well. Okay? So let's talk about Christianity today. So while religion played a really important role in Roman society, the worship of Roman gods was pretty impersonal, and it was often practiced without a great deal of emotion. As the empire grew, so too did a new religion called Christianity. It was born as a movement within Judaism. It emphasized a more personal relationship between God and people, and it attracted many Romans for some reasons that we'll explore. So the life and teachings of Jesus. So Roman power had spread to a place called Judea, which was the home of the Jews, around 63 BCE. At first, the Jewish kingdom remained pretty independent, at least in name, and then Rome took control of the Jewish kingdom around 6 CE and made it a province of the empire. A number of Jews, however, believed that they would once again be free. According to biblical traditions, God had promised them that a Savior known as the Messiah would arrive and restore the kingdom of the Jews. So, roughly 2 decades after the beginning of Roman rule, many believed that such Savior had arrived. Although the exact date is pretty uncertain, historians believe that sometime around 6 to 4 BCE, a Jew named Jesus was born in the town of Bethlehem in the province of Judea. Jesus was raised in a village of Nazareth in northern Palestine, and he was baptized by a prophet known as John the Baptist. As a young man, he took up the trade of carpentry. At the age of 30, Jesus began his public ministry, and for the next 3 years, he preached, he taught, he did good works, and reportedly performed miracles. Although, if you listen carefully to the video that I'm going to have you watch later, miracles during that time period weren't that uncommon in the sense that what people believed others could do. Anyway, just watch the video carefully and listen to what it has to say about miracles and historical record around that. His teachings contain many ideas from the Jewish tradition, such as monotheism, or the belief in only one God, and the principles of the 10 Commandments, which we've already covered in class. Jesus emphasized God's personal relationship to each human being. He stressed the importance of people's love for God, their neighbors, their enemies, and even themselves. He also taught that God would end wickedness in the world and would establish an eternal kingdom after death for people who sincerely repented their sins. We're going to watch just a little bit about this. So here's the kingdom of Judea. You're familiar with Phoenicia already. Tyre, Byblos, Sidon, those city-states in Phoenicia, if you remember. Nazareth, Bethlehem, and Jerusalem will be important. This right here is the West Bank area of Israel today. This right here is the Gaza Strip. And this right here are the general boundaries of the state of Israel today. A growing movement. So historical records of the time mention actually very little about Jesus. In fact, most of what we know won't be written until around 60, at the least 60 years after his death. And we'll look at those later on. The main source of information about his teachings are the Gospels, the first 4 books of the New Testament of the Bible. Remember, we already talked about the Old Testament, the Torah, the old Judaic sacred text making up the Old Testament. Well, now there'll be some new sources added, but well after Jesus' death. So the information in the teachings are in the Gospels, the first 4 books of the New Testament of the Bible, and some of the Gospels are thought to have been written by one or more of Jesus' disciples or pupils. These 12 men later became called or named the apostles of Jesus. As Jesus preached from town to town, his fame grew. He attracted a fairly small but loyal following, and many people were pretty touched by his message. Because Jesus ignored wealth and status, his message had a special appeal to the poor. He said things like, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." His words, as related in Gospels, were simple and direct. So, for example, this is from Luke. "Love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. If anyone hits you on the cheek, let him hit the other one too. If someone takes your coat, let him have your shirt as well. Give to everyone who asks you for something, and when someone takes what is yours, do not ask for it back. Do for others just what you want them to do for you." Jesus' growing popularity really concerned the Romans and, actually, before long, Jewish leaders as well. And when Jesus visited Jerusalem about 29 CE, enthusiastic crowds greeted him as the Messiah or the King, the one whom the Bible had said would come to rescue the Jews. The chief priests of the Jews, however, denied that Jesus was the Messiah. They said his teachings were maybe even blasphemy or contempt for God. The Roman government and the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate, accused Jesus of defying the authority of Rome. Pilate arrested Jesus and sentenced him to be crucified, just like any other political dissident of the time. Crucifixion is, of course, nailing to a large cross and left to die. Let's take a look at the spread of Christianity post Jesus' death. One of the things that helps the spread of Christianity is that massive Roman road system. The infrastructure that had been built up in Rome really enabled not only the transportation of people and goods, but of course ideas to spread throughout the Roman Empire. In the coming units, we will talk about the Crusades, the first of which is called for by Pope Urban II. There are 4 or 5, depending upon how you count them, crusades that get fought. And then in about the 1500s, the Age of Exploration begins. and ideas travel well beyond Western Europe at that point. The Spanish literally make it their mission to spread Christianity and Catholicism in particular throughout the Americas. Before we kept moving on, I just wanted to show you the Gospels. Sometimes these are even called the Synoptic Gospels because apparently they can be studied kind of back to back. Anyway, the Gospels, which name the apostles, you can see them listed here, 12 apostles, who were the disciples or pupils of Jesus. And after his death, they will carry on his message and do instruction, and some of them will be responsible in part for the stories that get told in the Gospels themselves. This is a famous painting of Christ giving the keys to St. Peter. Back here you have St. Peter's Basilica, which actually is where one of the disciples of Jesus is actually buried. Here's St. Peter, and Peter, supposedly according to tradition, becomes the very first pope of the Catholic faith. Okay, so while Jesus is alive, he does a variety of teachings, and because of his popularity, is an increasing threat to both the Roman Empire and the structures of Judaism as they exist at the time. So his growing popularity concerns them, and when Jesus visited Jerusalem about 29 AD or CE, all the crowds were greeting him, and some believed him to be the Messiah, which we already talked about, the one whom the Bible had said would come to rescue the Jews. The chief priests of the Jews denied that Jesus was the Messiah, and then we've already talked about Pontius Pilate accusing Jesus of defying the authority of Rome because the Jews consistently were rebelling against Rome and refused to worship Roman gods and things like that. So the Roman governor Pontius Pilate accused him of rebelling against Rome and sentenced him to be crucified, which of course he was, and you've seen video clip of that already. So Jesus is crucified, and after his death, his body is placed in a tomb, and according to the Gospels, which again, remember, according to historic record, these are written well after the death of Jesus, like 80 years perhaps. According to that, though, 3 days later the body was gone, and a living Jesus began to appear to his followers. The Gospels go on to say that then he ascended into heaven. The apostles were even more convinced than ever that Jesus was the Messiah, and it is from this belief that Jesus came to be referred to as Jesus Christ. Christos is the Greek word meaning Messiah or Savior, and the name Christianity was derived from Christ. Strengthened by their conviction that he had triumphed over death, the followers of Jesus continued to spread his ideas. Jesus' teachings did not contradict Jewish law, and his first followers were Jews. However, some of the followers began to create a new religion based on his messages. Despite political and religious opposition, the new religion of Christianity spread slowly but steadily throughout the Roman Empire. So later on, we will watch, much later on in the spring, we're going to explore Islam. We'll look at the difference between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All are considered Abrahamic faiths, all with roots that date back to Abraham. And in a really basic sense, Christians, the difference between Christianity and Judaism is that Christians view Jesus as the Messiah, and Judaism views Jesus as a prophet, really important, mentioned 90 times. Actually, the Quran mentions him 90 times. In Judaism, it's mentioned even more, but they don't view him as the Messiah.